Thundercade! Oh, it's NES Works 132. God, Thundercade for NES is awful. And in a way, that's kind of nice. After all the advancements and technical proficiency and great game design we've seen bunning up on NES here in 1989, a terrible arcade port by Micronics feels almost like a warm hug. I should be repulsed by this game, I know. It feels like software that you would have passed over in 1986 for being too janky and too slight to stand up to competing releases like Muscle or Tag Team Wrestling. Here in 1989, it's beyond offensive. But God bless him, publisher American Sammy seems determined to keep the spirit of Z-grade releases from the pre-Memory Manager ROM era of NES game design alive. And it's somehow charming? I mean, I feel awful for any child who ended up with this game instead of, say, Guerrilla War. But even then, Thundercade served its purpose as a purity test. Do you really love games, kid? Will you still love them, even though the only game you own for NES is a copy of Thundercade that your grandma got you for Christmas because it was marked down to be cheaper than any other game at KB Toys? If you can make it through this and come out on the other side, still seeing the value of video games as a medium, you just might have a future as a games journalist. Just kidding, there's no future in games journalism. Ask me how I know. I don't really understand how Thundercade actually reached shelves in the summer of 1989. We all know that the Nintendo seal of quality pretty much just meant this company paid us a license and manufacturing fee to produce authorized cartridges. But even so, Nintendo still had a concept approval process, and this somehow passed. An entire chain of humans had to look at this software and think, yes, this is satisfactory. That includes the developers who said, good enough, before submitting it to the publisher, who thought, we should definitely spend $500,000 to have this imprinted into silicon and submitted it to Nintendo for approval. And Nintendo, who said, yes, the children have been bad this year and deserve to experience this agony. Oh, and retailers, who figured they could somehow make money off such a repellent piece of software. Even the sailors, truck drivers, and train engineers who freighted it from Nintendo's plants in Japan to Walmart shelves in your town, USA are complicit. You know what you did. I can at least understand how Thundercade came into being, though. Micronics had done pretty well for themselves and for Acclaim, converting Toaplan and Taito's Tiger Heli to NES. The port played reasonably well and was even, dare I say, pretty fun. And here we have another vertical, military-themed vehicular shooter manufactured by Taito. You can almost imagine the dollar signs in Sammy's eyes as they dreamed of recreating the sales and receipts of Tiger Heli. But Thundercade is not Tiger Heli. For starters, Tiger Heli arrived on the NES during the early days, just as the console began to explode in popularity, and the system's library was still small enough that practically everything that made it to retail moved in pretty good numbers. Acclaim bootstrapped itself as an entity by taking advantage of that brief window in history, with executives traveling to Japan and selecting choice cuts from the vast array of unlocalized Famicom software, then delivering those unique experiences to American consumers eager to buy software for their new consoles. And if those games were a little rough, well, they still beat all flavors of hell out of what American game enthusiasts had seen on older consoles. That is not the case here in 1989. Thundercade went up against the likes of Ninja Gaiden, Mega Man 2, and Super Mario Bros. 2. And even if you just stuck to the shooter genre, there's no way this Thundercade port could stand up to the likes of Life Force or the Guardian Legend. And that would be true even if this were a bang-up port of the game. Tiger Heli was a clever, breezy shooter crafted by Toaplan, who were true giants of the genre. Thundercade was the work of Seta, who were not. And this isn't even a good port of that lackluster source material. Thundercade on NES assaults you with blobby sprites that would barely be legible even if they didn't flicker like a cheap motel's neon sign. The action crawls forward at a sputtering pace, dogged by Micronics' lifelong commitment to ensuring that no on-screen object moves at more than 20 frames per second. The controls feel mushy, and the hitboxes are imprecise. Worse, you're constantly besieged by enemies that attack suddenly and without warning and can't possibly be avoided. making death an inevitability. Granted, death is a mercy for sparing you the indignity of spending more time with this wretched mess, but still. In theory, Thundercade should be fun. You drive around in a super-powered combat motorcycle, blowing everything you see to smithereens as the screen scrolls vertically. You can destroy not only enemies, but the terrain too. And the screen is constantly swarmed by little guys running around on foot, whom you can take out of action just by running them over, which is always deeply satisfying in a way that almost makes you question your morals. Almost. And then the Tiger Heli parallels come into play. As in that game, Thundercade allows you to power up your motorcycle by picking up power-ups that bolt onto your bike and expand your firepower. This unfortunately is a bit limited here compared to Tiger Heli. Unless I'm doing something terribly wrong, besides playing the game in the first place, it appears you can only attach one upgrade to your bike at a time. So you can connect to a sidecar that doubles the width of your attack, or a forward missile that doubles your power, but you can't do both. Worse, the constant stream of untelegraphed enemy attacks means that holding on to an upgrade long enough to collect a second becomes a near impossible task in itself. Once again, this works like Tiger Heli in that the add-on bike components don't simply increase your attack power, but also function as sacrifices when you take a hit. Thundercade normally deals in one-hit kills, but you can shake off a hit if you hold an upgrade item. You lose the item, but not a life. Cheap attacks are the name of the game here though, so playing Thundercade amounts to an exercise in casting about desperately for upgrades and then losing them a few seconds later, when some sort of flying enemy appears from nowhere and attacks you with its unavoidable chaos pattern. It feels as bad as it looks and plays. And this almost makes me feel bad about turning Kung Fu Heroes into my NES Works 1989 punching bag. Again, almost. I just can't muster up that level of contempt for Thundercade though. It's bad, by any measure, but I can't bring myself to hate it. And it's Micronics, the guys who gave us Athena, via Sammy, the guys who gave us Amagon. You kinda know what you're getting into here. As a summer 1989 release, Thundercade feels fascinatingly primitive and backward. Like a monkey wandering into a MENSA meeting, Thundercade feels so out of place that you can't help but love it. Meanwhile, Guerrilla War from SNK offers an interesting contrast to Thundercade. After all, SNK got their start on NES by farming out their vertical shooters to Micronics, with terrible results. And now look how far we've come. Guerrilla War is, hands down, the best commando-derived vertical shooter we've seen on NES to date, and we've seen a ton of them, from SNK alone. Honestly, it would be easy to brush off Guerrilla War as more of the same, coming on the heels of Ikari Warriors, Victory Road, and RetroTink. But SNK has done something incredible here. They've iterated and improved with each of these releases. Ikari Warriors was, not to put too fine a point on it, hot, steaming garbage. A tedious, drawn-out, sloppy mess of a game, it really showcased Micronics at their absolute worst. A game so badly made that even the infinite continues cheat code that you needed in order to make any headway whatsoever wasn't a guarantee of victory, since the game would likely as not soft-lock your progress at some point. Victory Road didn't necessarily hold together a lot better, but Micronics, yes, as in see above, made a genuine effort to spruce up the NES version, adding combat arenas and something akin to an economy. And then once SNK ditched Micronics in favor of internal development, they came up with RetroTink, a narrative-driven vehicular shooter. Guerrilla War walks back from RetroTink in favor of a more straightforward, on-foot combat game. Well, for the most part. In Ikari fashion, it does allow you to jump into tanks and briefly blast the living hell out of everything in your path. But for the most part, this is an on-foot vertical shooter designed for solo or cooperative play. SNK has single-handedly made that an oversaturated format on NES by this point, and yet Guerrilla War deserves a look anyway. The difference between this and Ikari Warriors comes down to more than just technical details. Sure, this plays solidly, and it doesn't feel like a sluggish, flickery, barely controllable mess, which automatically puts it ahead of Ikari Warriors. But most of all, Guerrilla War actually feels designed. Every step of the way you encounter threats that appear to have been custom-tailored to that space, with the intent of surprising you or posing a challenge unique to that moment and location. First though, we should probably address the elephant in the room, namely the plot of Guerrilla War. On NES, Guerrilla War has no real plot to speak of. You're an unnamed freedom fighter trying to liberate your small island nation from a dictator. Standard fare, pretty boring. Famicom, however, both playable characters are given names in the manual and in-game text. Che and Fidel. That is, Che Guevara and Fidel Castro. Yes, SNK released this game in Japan under the title Guevara, and presented it as a dramatization of the duo's underground rebellion against Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista, who had risen to power by way of a US-backed coup that usurped Cuba's democratic elections. SNK probably correctly realized that many Americans wouldn't cotton to a game about the ascent of a communist regime that undermined American influence, and so they scrubbed overt references to Guevara, Castro, and Cuba from the text. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's kind of borderline tasteless to base a game on real-life figures in a modern-era military conflict, especially such controversial figures, making it all seem so heroic and frictionless. Then again, between this glorification of Guevara, coming hot on the heels of Desert Commander, and its celebration of Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps' victory for his close personal pal Der Fuhrer, this does offer a nice reminder for American NES kids that the rest of the world sees things in a very different light than Americans do. Or it would be a nice reminder if the games hadn't been scrubbed and bleached and bowdlerized. I suppose none of that really particularly matters because ultimately the proof is in the play. And the play in Guerrilla War is really good. Whatever you may personally think of Che Guevara's politics and legacy, the man ran a damn fine video game campaign. Fundamentally, Che and Fidel control like the Ikari Warriors. The arcade version made use of a rotary controller similar to that of SNK's earlier game, which of course had to be reworked for the NES D-pad. However, SNK did a much better job here of retooling the action to fit the simpler control setup. Guerrilla War may have lost a lot of the arcade game's nuance, but it doesn't feel compromised. It probably helps that Guerrilla War has a very different feel to its pacing than similar shooters. This is not a relentless, fast-paced march forward, but a more cautious, measured shooter. It's a little like Konami's Jackal in a sense. You need to rescue tons of hostages who appear in prodigious numbers and will result in a massive score penalty if you accidentally shoot them. In order to avoid hemorrhaging points, you need to advance with care and take careful aim, rather than dashing ahead and peppering the screen with bullets. This leads you to take a more cautious approach to the action than you usually see in vertical shooters, and it really works to Guerrilla War's advantage. Of course, Che and Fidel can collect all manner of weapon upgrades along the way by picking up various letter icons, and these present new considerations for your hostage interactions. Rather than indiscriminately spraying flame or launching fragmentary rockets, you need to be precise even with upgraded attacks. Or rather, especially with upgraded attacks. For example, the flamethrower wrecks everything in its path with a jet of fire, and that includes the barriers that sometimes obscure hostages, as well as the hostages themselves. Likewise, a rocket that sprays shrapnel forward from the point of impact can be the perfect tool for hitting enemies behind cover, but it will indiscriminately wipe out any captives they happen to hold. Now granted, you only lose 500 points for killing a hostage, while a rescued hostage is worth twice that. So if you kill 2 innocents for every one you rescue, it's still a wash. But that doesn't really fit the theme of the game now, does it? How are you supposed to be the hero of the people, Viva la Revolution, if you slaughter the people in cold blood? No, Guerrilla War is not a shooter for dead-eyed sociopaths, but rather for bleeding hearts. Or at least, hearts that bleed for bystanders while wiping their enemies from the face of the planet en masse. The vulnerability and ubiquity of hostages demands a slower, more methodical approach to forward progress than you typically see in a shooter like this, even once you've acquired a set of wheels, or rather treads, to roll over helpless foot soldiers in the classic Thundercade style. The enemy design and placement help reinforce this principle. SNK's designers did a phenomenal job of populating each stage with soldiers that behave in varied, dynamic ways. They may rush you, or they may fall back to lure you into an ambush. They fire at you from out-of-the-way places, and appear from foxholes in buildings, rushing from behind in a pincer attack, or hovering near hostages to use them as human shields. Curse Batista's running dog cowards. Lackeys of the imperialistic American state, tonight their mothers will be celebrating through bitter tears, rejoicing at their liberation from the fascist boot heel, even as they mourn the children who chose to obey like curs the oppressor's command. Down with Batista, down with Eisenhower, equality and freedom for all, at this, the glorious dawn of a new egalitarian age for Sorry about that, comrades. Guess I got a little carried away with revolutionary fervor there. Anyway, Guerrilla War looks good, and it plays even better. It really elevates the commando-style run-and-shoot action game to a new level. This is communism, baby. I, for one, can't wait to start queuing up for my daily hardtack and vodka ration. Nintendo Power didn't have much to say about either of these games, giving each one a little video shorts review before memory holing them. But did you really expect better from such spineless lackeys of imperialist capitalism? Next time on NES Works, hope you weren't planning to leave Eurasia alive.